Welcome to Grameen Foundation's podcast series, Women in Agriculture. We discuss ways in which we can transform systems, mindsets, perspectives, behaviors, and actions so that rural-based women farmers and women entrepreneurs can show up with their full power. I'm your host, Lakshmi Iyer. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Grameen Foundation's first podcast series called Women in Agriculture. I'm your host for today's podcast, Lakshmi Iyer, Innovations in Agriculture Director at Grameen Foundation. Grameen Foundation's mission is to reduce poverty and hunger, and women have always been at the center of our work. Today, we focus on income and entrepreneurship opportunities, agency and resilience as key outcomes of the work we do in agriculture, financial inclusion, and digital financial services. On today's episode, we'll be speaking with my amazing colleagues about our new Innovations in Agriculture strategy called Together We Grow, and its center focus on women and how the various components of the strategy have evolved with the aim of meeting the dynamic needs of women within agriculture. Agriculture is obviously the backbone of many of the countries we work in, and it is the predominant driver of income for women who are based in rural areas. Almost half of the agriculture workforce globally are women, and yet women face significant barriers to information, services, products, and even land. And even if women do gain access to these components needed for their livelihoods, they often are not decision makers with respect to where they could sell crops. They're often price takers, leaving them vulnerable to shocks and stressors that may arise during the cropping season, as well as during other times. There's so much to unpack with respect to Together We Grow and what it includes as a strategy and why. With that intro of our Together We Grow strategy, I'd like to introduce my colleagues, Gigi Gatti, Senior Director, Program Strategy and Learning, Bobby Gray, Senior Director, Research, and Emily Brown, Program Quality Associate. Thank you so much to the three of you for joining me on today's inaugural episode. I'm going to first turn the mic over to Gigi. And the question for you, Gigi, is really around the component of Together We Grow, aiming to integrate financial inclusion. Why financial inclusion? Why is it so critical for women smallholder farmers who own less than 2 hectares of land?
Hi, Lakshmi. Thank you for having me in your podcast today. Hi, everyone. Financial inclusion is core to everything Grameen does. It's central to all the interventions and approaches that we have. And the reason behind that is quite simple. At the end of the day, we are looking at raising or improving the economic viability of businesses, small businesses, especially the smallholder farmer business. And also, at the end of the day, what really matters is that we are able to increase the household revenue. So financial inclusion, is in our case is defined as formal access, to formal financial services. And that basically means that even if they have savings, they are not under their mattress, right? It is not in the coconut shells or it's not in a jar. Rather, it is saved in a bank where it is insured, usually by the regulatory bodies such as the central bank or depending on the country, right? Or basically the state insurance. And it's very important too that they have access to other types of financial services such as insurance and even payments. Payments are a very important financial service to have access to, especially in terms of being able to trace where the money is coming from and where the money is going. So that's the reason why financial inclusion needs to be part and an integral part, of any innovations in agriculture work.
Thanks so much, Gigi. I just want to build on that a little bit, and especially for our audience members who really may not be familiar with Grameen Foundation's approach to financial inclusion work. Would you mind talking a little bit about the types of activities we center on, ultimately how those activities impact women farmers?
Yeah, absolutely. So our interventions are spanning quite a big, spectrum, if I may put it that way. We work with on the institution level, okay, to start with. And what do I mean by that? We work with the service providers, which we call the financial service providers, which could be the banks, could be cooperatives if they are providing services to their members. They could be mobile network operators who have mobile money platforms. They could be fintechs. Microfinance institutions in particular has always been the primary partner of Grameen Foundation in a lot of our work. And so these financial service providers actually are the real providers of the financial services to these rural communities and rural households. And what we do with them is we help them design products so that their products can be more relevant, more user-friendly, and at the same time safe to use and also very accessible, to the rural communities that they serve, especially for women. In the design of financial products for women, certain considerations must be taken. An example of that would be the type of access that they can have. Could they be using an ATM machine if it was far away from their home? Should community agents who are able to provide banking services be there so that that we can meet them where they are. So there are many questions to answer on an institutional level, and that is what we do. We work very closely with the financial service providers in order for us to be able to come up with a design that is relevant, appropriate, and safe for women farmers and their households. The second level that we work with, I would put it as private sector partners, and these private sector partners could be, for instance, traders, they could be buyers, they could be aggregators, and maybe you'll ask me, financial services, So yes, and the reason behind that is because a lot of these traders, aggregators, and cooperatives even, they do provide some form of financial services in the form of even credit, loans. So while you might think that's not financial inclusion, yes, it's not per se, but the type of products and the type of services that they do, if it includes financial services, should also be taken into consideration so that it is not, it does not do any harm, to the women smallholder farmers. And I guess the third level is really working with what we call the agents. Okay, and the agents are basically the channels, the human channels that bring the financial service products, to the farms and to the households. So they could also be stationary in the form of small retail shops in the communities where these farmers reside. So an example of that is our work with the Mitras in India, wherein the Grameen Mitras are women, who are mobile enabled and are able to do house-to-house services. for payments, for top uploads, and even for buying inputs. Yeah. So that's just one example, and we can definitely talk more about that in the future. And last but not the least, of course, is designing with the clients themselves. So on that particular note, we do a lot of user-centric design work, taking into consideration what is understood and what is very usable, in terms of products. And we use this using what we call the solutions innovations process, which basically involves designing with the user. So it could be as simple as asking the clients, the women smallholder farmers, how do they order their inputs? And going through that process and trying to modify it so that it can be a better experience for them.
Thank you, Gigi, for that overview of our financial inclusion work. I wonder, Emily, because I know that you and Gigi just went to the ground and were in India a few weeks ago. And I wonder if you wanted to talk any more about the mitras that Gigi had mentioned, and what you had seen on the ground, to bring it a little bit more to life.
Absolutely. Thanks, Lakshmi, and thanks, Gigi, again for that intro. I think there are just a few things that I wanted to add, just based on my experience in the field in India. One of the things that stuck out to me about what Gigi was saying was that she was talking about financial inclusion and its connection to access for women. And I think that's something that really stuck out to me as we spoke with these mitras in India. Just these women, seeing the need for financial access in their communities that otherwise wouldn't have access to an ATM or other financial services, and then being able to have the opportunity to become a mitra, to be trained, and then to provide services to their communities. It was really amazing. I mean, some of these women had 90 plus customers and were providing, the basic banking services, but also their services extended to helping provide sanitary napkins and things that may not be obviously connected to financial inclusion, but were powerful modes of access for their communities. So I think, financial inclusion, as we think about it, and as I was there in India, it just really became obvious that there are women who live in rural areas who may not be able to leave their homes, but they still need access to credit and to banking or mobile cash services on a regular basis. And having that access through someone in your community who you know and trust is a really powerful tool.
Thanks, Emily. I wonder, Bobby, if you could talk a little bit about what the research is showing. Is this something that's important and useful for women, and how could it be made even more useful?
Sure. Thanks, Lakshmi. It's great to be here. Maybe one thing I'll start with is a reflection on our use of the project level women's empowerment and agricultural tool that IFPRI has been testing out in various contexts. We've recently completed a baseline with smallholder farmers in Uttar Pradesh. And, one of the things that really stood out to me, because we have a chance to interview both men and women, is how men use credit, for example, more for agricultural investment, whereas women are using credit for household management. And so I think one of the things, as we're designing products and services, we have to really understand the differences in how people are using. And one of the questions that has come up for us is really, trying to understand, is this a preference, a household preference, kind of like a division of labor where the couple decides that the man will use credit, to invest in agriculture, whereas the woman will use credit for basic household management, school fees, you name it? Or is it because the services that are available to women really don't speak to the needs or the investments that they do want to make in agriculture. Maybe it's the lack of collateral to actually have a loan large enough to make an agricultural investment that is a barrier. So we're using the research like this to really help us think through what are the services that people need, where do they need to come from. And I think the use of the mitras within an agricultural project really speaks to women's financial management, because they are doing some of these smaller transactions, et cetera, but not having access to agricultural finance, which may be coming through formal institutions and less through mitras, is something that I think we really need to continue to explore.
Really fascinating. Thank you to the three of you for outlining the financial inclusion component of Together We Grow and why it's really critical and important, and why it really stands out as probably the first foundational kind of building block for the strategy. I'll move a little bit into the markets first approach with respect to Together We Grow and why that component is in there. And of course, Grameen Foundation has worked in a markets first approach in the past. We're really taking that into consideration within this strategy, trying to suggest that women at this stage, unfortunately, and although they are doing at least 50% of the work, if not more, across many of the key value chains globally, unfortunately, they're not viable or visible market players. And there are times and barriers where they're unable to go and sell their product on their own. There's always been a pigeonholing of women into women-centric crops, even though they're doing work across many of the value chains. But this component is really to look into why there is not as much agency and why there isn't as much visibility, and what we need to do with respect to system development and transformation for women to equitably be able to contribute and raise their profiles and come to the table with that full power. And so, I just want to pause and ask if there are any examples that anybody would like to come in on with respect to talking about a markets first approach that perhaps you may have seen on the ground with any of our work in India.
So maybe I can share a little bit about, what we've seen as the vermicomposting example in India. So an example of this would be like in India, there is now a growing awareness, for using organic fertilizers, in the farms. And one of the low-hanging fruits was that a lot of the women farmers are also raising livestock, and they have access to manure, and specifically in this case, cow manure. So it was very easy for one of the cooperatives, actually not one, but two or three, I think, cooperatives that we visited, but one had this very specific organized way of doing it. And they were helping set up, some sort of like a vermicomposting bed for women, so that they can just scoop out the manure, put it there, let it dry, water it every now and then if that is something that is needed. But basically you just leave it there, until it disintegrates and it turns into a vermicompost, which is in its concentrated form a very, very high, of high quality fertilizer. And the women who do this and participate in this is that, they find it just so easy for them, because the materials are there. All they do is have to, scoop it out, put it in the vermicomposting bed, basically forget about it until it's ready, and then move them, around so that they have different phases of vermiculture being done in the farm. And in most cases, they won't be able to use all of this. So they bag the excess produce that they have, and the cooperative is able to sell it for them. And this is something that is financially rewarding, because they basically have almost no cost of doing it. And I think this is an example of a markets first approach. Although if you look at it, really, it could also be the reverse, right? There is the supply, but the demand really is the key here. You know, they are able to sell this vermicompost at a very good price. So I hope that example kind of resonates to your question, Lakshmi. Yeah.
Just to emphasize what Gigi said, I mean, we went to visit some of the vermicomposting pads, and it I can't say it was exciting because really the work is being done under the dirt, right? So, but just to emphasize the fact that it's so low maintenance, but yet it's such a good form of income and just great work for women who are already doing so much. It's just low maintenance. So it was really interesting to see it in real life.
It made me actually feel like, should I buy a cow?
I know, I could do this.
I can do this. Yeah. You know, anything that's low maintenance, I can do. But yeah, no, so I thought the same way too, Emily, that, you know, as far as women's burden is concerned, then this is really an example of where we are not adding to the women's burden.
Yeah, no, and I was just thinking as they were talking that, you know, this reducing drudgery is really a core component of the strategy we want to be pursuing going forward. And some of this is because we've been having some experiences where we've designed projects and we've gotten into them and realized that, you know, if you really want to impact what women are doing within agriculture, some of the more important investments may not necessarily be providing access to something really flashy and new, but helping manage the workload that they already have. A few years ago, we were doing a coconut project in Ghana, and you know, when we were talking to some of the women about what more could we be doing to support you in cocoa farming, it wasn't, you know, access to credit, it wasn't access to some new market player, et cetera, but it was really just to unburden the work that they were doing by carrying cocoa pods from a farm all the way to their home. For some women, maybe that's a 10-minute walk. For others, it could be an hour, you know, and many of us working in international development often see people walking along the roads carrying massive loads of wood, coconut, cocoa, you name it. And so some of the women really just wanted carts so that instead of carrying something on their back and hurting, you know, physically hurting them and causing them pain, they just wanted carts to be able to push or to be able to hook on to a motorcycle to, you know, carry the cocoa from their farm to their house. And so I think this is just one area that I'm probably most excited to work on, because I think, just like Gigi was saying, for any woman, you're really busy and you're always just looking for something to make your life a little bit easier, make something, you know, go a little bit more quickly. But I think as we're doing that, you know, there are other experiences out there, such as when I was doing some research in Burkina Faso, IFPRI also had a project in northern Burkina Faso, and they were trying to provide water pumps to women because women are typically the ones carrying water, you know, to water their vegetable crops, to water larger crops that the household is growing. But they learned by the end of the project that the men had taken over the pumps because obviously they saw the same benefit to their larger, if whether they were growing wheat or maize, you name it, the men had taken it over. So I think even as we're really looking at these options and innovations and, you know, trying to reduce drudgery for women, we have to also be paying attention to how is the household actually going to use this, even though we're designing it and directing it directly to women.
I think that was something that we also noticed when we were in Uttar Pradesh, that one of the farmer producer organizations, they made an intentional decision to buy a potato digger to help reduce women's labor and time burden, since they're the ones who are cultivating the potatoes that they were farming. So it came out that the hired labor were really the ones who were using the potato diggers. That could be women. We aren't sure, but I mean, it was great to see that they were making decisions to help focus on women and help reduce their time and labor burden and drudgery overall, but we have to just be intentional about these efforts and how they affect women at the household level and beyond.
I just remember, Emily, when they were talking about the potato digger, that, two of the women, who were having access to a potato digger, their eyes just lit, you know. They were kind of like, whoa, potato digger, that was really useful, or something like that. But I saw that glow in their eyes. And I remember we did speak about the hours, the number of hours that it cut down. I do not remember, to be very honest, right now, but it was a pretty impressive, a time reduced for them.
Yeah, I think that's just that's an interesting example, because we're talking about farmer producer organizations that may not have considered this type of labor time burden that women are facing, because they may not have had an intent to add women shareholders until this real kind of concerted effort to do this. And I guess to follow on, Bobby, with respect to reducing drudgery as a facet of Together We Grow and as a component of it, I wanted to talk a little bit about the shocks and the stressors that women are facing. They're obviously facing a lot of they're facing drudgery, but they're also facing shocks and stressors as there is a severe feminization of agriculture taking place. Men are out migrating. Women are becoming more and more responsible for the farm as a whole. I wonder what our strategy is doing to address this, or what are we aiming to do as shocks and stressors, especially related to economic shocks and stressors and climate shocks and stressors, are aiming to do about that.
Sure. One of the research projects that has probably been my favorite for all the time that I've been working for Grameen Foundation was one that we launched in Burkina Faso, where we just had the chance to actually ask the question, what is resilience? And as a financial service providing kind of technical assistance organization, what is our role in building household resilience? And I think through this project, it was really eye-opening, because you saw the strategies that people were already using to anticipate shocks, such as, belonging to a self-help group, for example, or drying certain vegetables, or frankly, some unintended consequences or some kind of negative coping mechanisms, or reducing, food consumption to manage the money in the household that was already limited. So I think this has been an area that we've tried to deepen our understanding of what our household's doing. How can we better help them plan for shocks? Because it's not just a question of, if a shock is going to happen, it's actually when a shock is going to happen. And given the environment that we live in, right now, even in Texas, where I'm from, we went from several years of an extreme drought to having the past several months. I think we've gotten 30 inches of rain in 2 to 3 month period. And that is unheard of in this area. And we're not the only ones experiencing this. Obviously, we have mechanisms to help us cope with those. And in the context where we work, the resources are a lot more limited. So I think what we're really focusing on is helping people think about the plans they need to have in place to anticipate shocks, whether they're climate shocks, whether they are just health shocks, for example. How can they plan for those? How can they set money aside for those? How can they come up with strategies to anticipate those? And then ensure that they're able to bounce back from those. One of the cool things that we saw in the research in Burkina, when we were actually implementing the project level Women's Empowerment and Agricultural Index in a research project, there was to actually see over 3 different survey periods that there was an economic downturn in the middle of that. And we actually saw women in their households bounce back and even be stronger by the time we interviewed them at the inline. So I think if we're able to really help people plan for, anticipate, and recover from these shocks, that we're really contributing to something really important about to really help support them in bringing their households out of poverty.
Thanks for that, Bobby. It's really clear. I mean, anything we can do, I think, to provide that power back to to individuals, households, and women to make those decisions on their own. Colleagues, this has been a really great discussion. Thank you so much. We've covered financial inclusion, a markets first approach, reducing drudgery, and building resilience and building adaptation as key components of the Together We Grow strategy. Is there anything we've missed?
I think we just have a lot more to talk about, Lakshmi.
Absolutely. I can't wait for the next episode. I'm looking forward to connecting with all of you again then. Thank you again for being here, to the audience, and of course to my amazing colleagues.